Document. Part 1. The sky above Chicago was unusually quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that made people glance up instinctively, as if expecting something to break the stillness. Bill Carter sat hunched over his workstation at O'Hare Air Force Base, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the radar screen in front of him. It wasn't unusual for Bill to pull long shifts, monitoring airspace activity. His job required patience and attention to detail, but today felt different. Something about the air seemed heavier, almost electric. At first he thought it might just be fatigue playing tricks on him. He'd been working non-stop for nearly 12 hours, keeping an eye out for any irregularities after reports of strange atmospheric disturbances had trickled in from other bases across the country. But then, a flicker caught his eye on the radar display. A cluster of blips appeared suddenly, moving too fast to belong to anything human-made. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he zoomed in on the readings. Whatever these objects were, they weren't following standard flight paths or emitting recognizable signals. Bill frowned and leaned closer to the screen. "This can't be right," he muttered under his breath. He tapped a few keys, running diagnostics to rule out equipment malfunctions. The results came back clean. The system was functioning perfectly. That meant whatever was showing up on the radar was real, and it was big. He picked up the phone and dialed the command center. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at his station, their faces tense as they studied the data. One of them, Captain Lewis, immediately ordered all nearby fighter jets on standby, while the other contacted higher command. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Pasadena, California, Laura Bennett sat in her lab at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, staring at a series of charts displayed on her computer monitor. She had spent most of the night analyzing recent satellite images that showed unexplained anomalies in Earth's upper atmosphere. Bright flashes of light, sudden temperature spikes didn't add up. At first, she thought it could be solar flares or some kind of cosmic event, but none of the usual explanations fit. Her phone buzzed loudly on the desk, startling her. It was Dr. Alan Peterson, one of her colleagues. "Laura, have you seen this?" he asked, without preamble, his tone clipped. Before she could respond, he sent over a file containing new data collected by orbiting telescopes. As she opened it, her heart sank. There, unmistakably, were dozens of massive objects descending through Earth's atmosphere. They weren't natural phenomena. They were ships. "Oh no," Laura whispered, leaning back in her chair. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a random occurrence. It was deliberate. Someone or something was coming here, and judging by the size of those vessels, they weren't planning a friendly visit. Back in Chicago, panic began to spread as more reports poured in from radar stations around the world. Similar sightings were being confirmed in Europe, Asia, and South America. The objects were slowing down now, positioning themselves directly over major cities. People outside looked up, shielding their eyes against the glare of sunlight reflecting off metallic surfaces. Social media exploded with videos and photos, each captioned with questions and theories. Was this some kind of military exercise gone wrong, or was it aliens? By mid-afternoon, the truth became impossible to ignore. The largest ship, hovering ominously over downtown Chicago, emitted a low hum that vibrated through the city streets. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot downward, projecting a massive holographic image into the sky. The figure depicted was tall and humanoid, though its features were sharp and angular, unlike anything human. Its voice boomed across the city, speaking in perfect English. "We are the Vorthen Collective," the figure declared, its tone cold and mechanical. "Your resistance is futile. Surrender your planet to us, and we will spare your species from extinction." People froze where they stood, gaping in disbelief. Some dropped to their knees, praying silently, while others screamed and ran for cover. In living rooms and offices around the world, televisions broadcast the message live, translating it into every language imaginable. Panic erupted globally as humanity realized it was facing an enemy far beyond its comprehension. In Washington, D.C., General Richard Hayes watched the transmission unfold on a large screen in the Pentagon's Situation Room. Around him, top military officials and government leaders exchanged grim looks. This wasn't how anyone had imagined first contact would go. Hayes clenched his fists tightly, his jaw set in determination. He turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, despite the chaos swirling around them. "We've known this day might come. For decades, we've prepared for it even if we hoped it never would." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Operation Sentinel is now active. I want everyone focused and ready. We may not have their technology, but we have something they don't: resilience. Let's show them what humanity is made of." As Hayes spoke, Laura received a call, summoning her to an emergency briefing at the Pentagon. She grabbed her laptop and rushed out of the lab, her mind racing with possibilities. If the aliens were truly as advanced as they seemed, humanity's chances of survival looked bleak. But there was still hope. Over the years, she had worked alongside teams developing cutting-edge technologies based on reverse-engineered alien artifacts recovered from past encounters. Could those efforts give Earth a fighting chance? By evening, the situation had escalated further. Alien ground forces began deploying from smaller ships stationed near coastal regions. Reports flooded in from Los Angeles, Tokyo, Sydney, and London, describing strange, insectoid creatures marching through streets with terrifying efficiency. Their movements were synchronized, almost mechanical, leaving destruction in their wake. Civilians scrambled to evacuate, while local law enforcement and military units attempted to hold them back. Jake Thompson crouched behind a barricade in downtown Los Angeles, gripping his rifle tightly. A Marine fresh out of training, he had never imagined his first real combat experience would involve extraterrestrials. Bullets ricocheted off the aliens' armored exoskeletons, doing little damage. His unit retreated hastily, leaving Jake stranded amidst the chaos. Heart pounding, he ducked into an abandoned warehouse, hoping to avoid detection. Inside, he found Sarah Miller tending to a wounded civilian. Her medical kit lay open beside her, and her hands moved quickly as she applied pressure to the man's injury. When she noticed Jake, her eyes widened in alarm, but he raised a hand to reassure her. "I'm not one of them," he said softly. "I'm with the Marines." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank God, I thought I was alone here." For a moment, neither of them spoke, listening instead to the distant sounds of gunfire and screams. Outside, the alien forces continued their relentless advance. Jake glanced at Sarah, noting the determination in her expression despite the terror surrounding them. "We need to get out of here," he said finally. "But we'll need to work together if we want to survive." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Again. "All right, what's the plan?" Jake didn't have one, not yet, but he knew they couldn't stay put. Not with the aliens closing in. Together, they gathered what supplies they could find and prepared to make their move, unaware that their paths would soon intersect with others fighting to protect what remained of humanity. As night fell, cities burned, and fear gripped the hearts of billions. One thing became clear: Earth's darkest hour had arrived. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit refused to yield. Somewhere, deep within the collective resolve of its people, a spark of defiance burned, brightly a promise that surrender was not an option. Document Part 2. The holographic message from the Vorthen Collective continued to echo across the globe. Its cold, mechanical voice demanding surrender. The words repeated endlessly, like a grim reminder of humanity's precarious position. In Chicago, where the largest alien ship loomed over the skyline, people huddled in basements and shelters, clutching their loved ones and praying for salvation. The streets were eerily empty now, save for the occasional patrol of insectoid creatures marching with precision. Their movements were unnervingly synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. In Washington, D.C., General Richard Hayes stood at the head of the Situation Room table, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with focus. Around him, military leaders, scientists, and government officials exchanged urgent whispers, each trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before them. On the large screen mounted on the wall, live footage streamed in from cities around the world, images of destruction, panic, and resistance. Hayes raised a hand to silence the room. "We've prepared for this," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Decades ago, we started Operation Sentinel because we knew something like this could happen. Now it's time to put those preparations into action." He turned to Laura Bennett, who had just arrived after being summoned earlier that day. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her laptop. Despite her fear, there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. Hayes gestured for her to step forward. "Dr. Bennett," he began, "you've been working on reverse engineering alien technology for years. What can you tell us about these beings?" Laura took a deep breath, steadying herself. She opened her laptop and connected it to the main display. A series of diagrams and charts appeared, showing fragments of alien artifacts recovered from past encounters. "From what we've analyzed," she explained, "the Vorthan Collective operates using a hive mind system. Every individual is connected to a central intelligence, which coordinates their actions. If we can disrupt that connection, we might be able to throw them into disarray." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "And how do we do that?" Laura hesitated, glancing down at her notes. "It won't be easy. Their technology is far more advanced than ours. But we've developed electromagnetic pulse devices (EMPs) that could potentially interfere with their communication networks. The problem is getting close enough to deploy them." Before Hayes could respond, Colonel Grace Monroe entered the room. Tall and commanding, she carried an air of authority that demanded attention. "General," she said, handing him a folder, "we've received reports of civilian resistance forming in multiple cities. Some are organizing guerrilla-style attacks against the invaders. It's risky, but it's buying us time." Hayes flipped through the folder, his brow furrowing. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get. Colonel, I want you to coordinate with these groups. Provide them with whatever resources you can spare. And Dr. Bennett," he turned back to Laura, "I need you to work on refining those EMP devices. Time is not on our side." Laura nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'll do everything I can." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Jake Thompson and Sarah Miller moved cautiously through the abandoned warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust covering the floor. Outside, the sounds of alien activity grew louder: screeches, metallic clangs, and the occasional burst of energy fire. Jake peered out from behind a broken window, scanning the street below. The insectoid creatures were everywhere, their armored bodies gleaming under the dim light of the setting sun. "We can't stay here," Jake whispered, turning back to Sarah. "They'll find us eventually." Sarah adjusted the strap of her medical kit, her hands steady, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Where do we go? The city's crawling with them." Jake pointed toward the outskirts of the city, where the industrial district lay. "There's an old factory on the edge of town. It's isolated, and there might be supplies we can use. If we're lucky, we can hole up there until things calm down." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's move." They slipped out of the warehouse, sticking to the shadows as they navigated the deserted streets. Every sound made them freeze. Every movement in the distance sent their hearts racing. At one point, they narrowly avoided detection when a group of aliens passed within feet of their hiding spot. Jake held his breath, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. When the creatures finally moved on, he exhaled slowly and signaled for Sarah to follow. After what felt like hours, they reached the factory. Its rusted gates hung crookedly, and the windows were shattered, but it looked structurally sound. Inside, the air was musty, and the floor was littered with debris. Jake quickly secured the perimeter while Sarah checked for anything useful. To their relief, they found crates of canned food, bottled water, and even a few tools. "This will keep us alive for a while," Sarah said, her voice tinged with hope. "But we're going to need more than this if we're going to fight back." Jake nodded, his mind racing. "We need weapons, better ones, and maybe some way to communicate with others who are still resisting." As they settled in for the night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He took turns keeping watch with Sarah, his rifle always within arm's reach. The thought of facing the aliens again filled him with dread, but he knew they had no choice. Survival meant fighting, and fighting meant finding allies. Back in Washington, D.C., Laura worked tirelessly in a secure lab, surrounded by teams of engineers and technicians. The EMP devices were crude compared to the aliens' technology, but they represented humanity's best chance at disrupting the hive mind. Laura pored over schematics, running simulations, and tweaking designs. Her hands moved quickly, assembling components and testing circuits. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. At one point, Colonel Monroe stepped into the lab, her expression grave. "How's it coming?" she asked. Laura didn't look up from her work. "It's slow going, but we're making progress. The biggest challenge is range. These devices only work within a few hundred meters, and we'd need to get dangerously close to the aliens to use them effectively." Monroe crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the prototypes scattered across the table. "What if we used drones? Could we modify them to carry the EMP?" Laura paused, considering the idea. "It's possible, but we'd need to program them to target specific frequencies. Otherwise, they might not penetrate the aliens' shields." Monroe nodded. "Get me a list of what you need. I'll see to it personally." As Monroe left the lab, Laura allowed herself a moment of reflection. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. If she failed, humanity's chances of survival would plummet, but failure wasn't an option not when so much was at stake. Across the country, other pockets of resistance began to form. In New York City, Emily Parker monitored news feeds and intercepted alien communications from her apartment-turned-command center. A former hacker, she had spent years dodging authorities before being recruited by a shadowy government agency. Now, her skills were invaluable. Using sophisticated software, she decrypted fragments of the aliens' language, piecing together patterns in their movements. They're targeting key infrastructure, she muttered to herself, typing furiously. Power grids, water supplies, communication networks. They're trying to cripple us before we can mount a real defense. She forwarded her findings to General Hayes, who immediately relayed the information to military commanders. Armed with Emily's intel, troops launched targeted strikes against alien positions, slowing their advance. Though the battles were brutal and losses were high, the resistance managed to hold its ground. As night fell, the world remained locked in a deadly standoff. The aliens continued their relentless assault, their forces spreading further inland. Cities burned, and millions fled in search of safety. Yet amidst the devastation, small acts of courage and defiance shone brightly. Ordinary people banded together, arming themselves with whatever they could find. Soldiers fought valiantly, knowing the odds were stacked against them. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, driven by the hope that humanity's ingenuity could prevail. In the darkness, Laura stared at the glowing screen of her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Beside her, a prototype EMP device hummed softly, its circuits pulsing with potential. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she refused to give up. Not yet. Outside, the hum of alien ships filled the air, a constant reminder of the threat looming overhead. But somewhere, deep within the hearts of those still fighting, a spark of hope remained. It was fragile, uncertain, and tenuous, but it was there, and as long as it burned, humanity would keep resisting. Document Part 3. The sun rose over a world forever changed. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of alien technology. The once familiar skyline of Los Angeles was now a jagged silhouette of crumbling buildings and burning debris. Jake Thompson leaned against a rusted metal beam inside the old factory, his rifle resting across his knees. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he refused to let exhaustion take hold. Sarah Miller sat nearby, wrapping her hands around a mug of lukewarm water. Her medical kit lay open beside her, its contents dwindling. "We need to find more people," Jake said finally, breaking the silence. "Two of us can't do this alone." Sarah nodded, though doubt lingered in her expression. "You're right, but how? Most of the city's either under their control or abandoned." Jake glanced toward the broken window, where faint screeches echoed in the distance. The aliens were still out there, hunting down survivors. "We'll have to risk it. If we stay here too long, they'll find us anyway." He stood up and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's move south. There might be others hiding near the harbor, maybe even some Marines who got separated." Sarah hesitated, but grabbed her medical kit and followed him. As they stepped outside, the streets were eerily quiet. Cars lay abandoned, their doors wide open as if their owners had fled in a hurry. Piles of rubble blocked entire roads, forcing them to take detours through narrow alleys. Every step felt like walking into a trap, every shadow a potential threat. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air. Jake froze, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her behind a pile of debris. A group of insectoid aliens marched down the street ahead, their movements synchronized and mechanical. They carried strange weapons that glowed faintly, emitting an unsettling energy. Jake held his breath, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. He knew firing would give away their position, but he couldn't just sit idly by. After what felt like an eternity, the aliens passed, leaving behind only the echo of their footsteps. Jake exhaled slowly and turned to Sarah. "That was too close. We need to keep moving." In Washington, D.C., Laura Bennett worked tirelessly alongside Colonel Grace Monroe and a team of engineers. The prototype EMP devices were nearly ready, but time was running out. Reports poured in from across the globe. Alien forces were advancing rapidly, overwhelming resistance efforts in major cities. Humanity's defenses were crumbling, and panic threatened to consume even the most disciplined soldiers. Laura stared at the glowing circuits of the latest EMP device, her mind racing. "These won't work unless we can get them close enough," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "And even then, they might not disrupt the hive mind for long." Monroe crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Then we'll have to make sure they're deployed strategically. What about modifying drones? Can we program them to fly directly into enemy formations?" Laura nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it could work. The drones would need to be equipped with self-destruct mechanisms to ensure maximum impact." "Do it," Monroe ordered. "I'll authorize whatever resources you need." As the team scrambled to modify the drones, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were grasping at straws. The aliens' technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, and every solution they devised felt like a desperate gamble. Still, she pushed forward, driven by the hope that even the smallest advantage could turn the tide. Meanwhile, Emily Parker sat hunched over her computer in her New York City apartment, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She had spent hours analyzing intercepted alien transmissions, searching for patterns or weaknesses. Her screen was cluttered with lines of code and fragmented translations, but one phrase kept appearing: Central Nexus. It seemed to refer to a specific location, a hub controlling the HiveMind network. "This has to be it," Emily muttered to herself, highlighting the phrase. If we can find this nexus and destroy it, we might be able to cripple their entire operation. She forwarded her findings to General Hayes, who immediately convened another emergency meeting. In the Situation Room, military leaders studied Emily's data, their faces etched with urgency. Hayes pointed to a map projected on the wall, marking several possible locations for the central nexus based on Emily's analysis. If this is accurate, Hayes said, his voice steady but intense, we need to strike fast. Hit them where it hurts. Colonel Monroe stepped forward. Sir, I recommend deploying special ops teams to each of these sites. If Dr. Bennett's EMP devices are ready, we can use them to disable any defenses guarding the nexus. Hayes nodded. Make it happen, and contact all surviving resistance groups. Tell them to focus their efforts on drawing the aliens away from these locations. We'll need every advantage we can get. Back in Los Angeles, Jake and Sarah reached the outskirts of the harbor district. The area was quieter than the rest of the city, though signs of destruction were everywhere. Ships lay capsized in the water, their hulls scorched and twisted. Cranes toppled over like broken toys, and warehouses stood gutted and empty. As they moved cautiously through the ruins, they heard voices, human voices. Jake signaled for Sarah to stay low as they approached a partially collapsed building. Inside, they saw a small group of survivors huddled together. One man, wearing tattered fatigues, held a rifle and scanned the room nervously. Another woman tended to a wounded boy, her hands trembling as she applied a makeshift bandage. Jake stepped into view, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. We're not with them, he said quickly. We're looking for survivors. The man lowered his rifle slightly, but didn't relax. Who are you? Jake Thompson, Marine Corps. He gestured to Sarah. This is Sarah Miller. She's a medic. The man exchanged a glance with the others before nodding. Mark Reynolds, former Army. These folks are civilians we're trying to hold out until help arrives. There won't be any help, Jake replied bluntly. At least, not from the military. We're on our own. Reynolds frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he motioned for them to join the group. What's your plan? Jake hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. We're heading to the harbor, looking for supplies and maybe a way to fight back. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. There's a cargo ship docked nearby, abandoned, but intact. Could be useful. Hope flickered in Jake's chest. Show us. As the group made their way to the ship, tensions ran high. Every sound set them on edge. Every shadow sparked paranoia. When they finally reached the vessel, it was clear it hadn't been touched by the invaders. Supplies were scattered across the deck, and the engine room appeared functional. For the first time in days, Jake allowed himself a moment of optimism. This could be our base, he said, turning to the others. We fortify it, gather more survivors, and hit back when we're ready. Reynolds agreed, though his tone remained cautious. It's better than nothing. But we'll need to act fast. They'll find us sooner or later. Sarah began organizing the wounded, using the ship's limited resources to treat injuries. Others scavenged for food and ammunition, while Jake and Reynolds took turns keeping watch. Despite the odds stacked against them, a sense of purpose began to form among the group. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. In Washington, D.C., Laura watched as the first modified drone lifted off the ground, its payload containing an EMP device. The test run was successful. The drone navigated a simulated battlefield, targeting mock alien signals with precision. Though far from perfect, the technology represented humanity's best chance at disrupting the invaders' coordination. Colonel Monroe approached Laura, her expression unreadable. How many can we deploy? Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. Not enough. But it's a start. With any luck, they'll buy us time to execute the main plan. Monroe nodded grimly. Time is something we don't have much of. As the day wore on, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on everyone involved, from the scientists working on EMP devices to the soldiers preparing for dangerous missions. Each person understood the stakes. Failure meant extinction. Success meant survival, but even then, it would come at a cost. Outside, the hum of alien ships filled the air, a constant reminder of the threat looming above. Yet amidst the chaos, small acts of courage continued to shine. Ordinary people banded together, refusing to surrender. Soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing the odds were slim. Scientists pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, determined to give humanity a fighting chance. In the darkness, Laura stared at the glowing circuits of the EMP device, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she refused to give up. Not yet. Somewhere, deep within the hearts of those still resisting, a spark of hope remained. It was fragile, uncertain, and tenuous, but it was there. And as long as it burned, humanity would keep fighting. Document Part 4. The cargo ship rocked gently in the water, its rusted hull creaking as waves lapped against it. Inside, Jake Thompson and Mark Reynolds pored over a map spread across a makeshift table. The dim light from a lantern cast long shadows on the walls, making the cramped room feel even smaller. Around them, the group of survivors worked tirelessly, some patching up injuries, others sorting through scavenged supplies. The air smelled of salt water, sweat, and desperation. "We need to fortify this place," Jake said, tracing a line along the map with his finger. "If we can set up defenses around the perimeter, we might be able to hold them off." Reynolds nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "It's better than nothing, but we're still outnumbered. Even if we manage to fend them off once, they'll keep coming." Jake clenched his jaw. He knew Reynolds was right, but giving up wasn't an option. "We don't have to win every battle. We just need to survive long enough for someone else to figure out how to stop them." Sarah Miller entered the room, her face pale but determined. She carried a clipboard filled with notes about the wounded. "We've treated everyone we can, but we're running low on medicine. If we don't find more soon, some of these people won't make it." Jake glanced at her, guilt gnawing at him. Survivors were counting on him, and he felt the weight of their lives pressing down harder with each passing moment. "Okay," he said finally. "Mark, you stay here and organize the defenses. Sarah, come with me. We'll head into the city and look for supplies." Reynolds frowned. "Are you sure that's wise? The aliens are everywhere. It's a risk," Jake admitted. "But we don't have a choice." As dawn broke, Jake and Sarah moved cautiously through the streets of Los Angeles. The sunlight filtered weakly through thick clouds of smoke, casting an eerie glow over the ruins. Buildings lay in shambles, their windows shattered and walls scorched. Cars were overturned, and debris littered the roads. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of alien ships. They stuck to the shadows, avoiding open areas where they could easily be spotted. Every step felt like walking into a trap. Every sound made them freeze. At one point, they ducked behind a pile of rubble as a patrol of insectoid aliens passed by. Their movements were unnervingly synchronized, their weapons glowing faintly with energy. Jake held his breath, his hand gripping the rifle tightly. When the creatures finally disappeared around a corner, he exhaled slowly. "Let's move," he whispered. They continued deeper into the city, heading toward what had once been a hospital. It was a long shot. The building was likely destroyed, but it was their best chance of finding medical supplies. As they approached, they saw that part of the structure was still standing. Its walls were blackened from fire, and chunks of concrete lay scattered across the ground. Inside, the scene was grim. The floors were covered in dust and broken glass, and the air smelled of decay. Rooms had been ransacked, their contents strewn about haphazardly. Sarah moved quickly, checking cabinets and drawers for anything useful. Jake stayed close, keeping watch. "I found something," Sarah called softly, holding up a box of bandages and antiseptic. Jake nodded, relief washing over him. Good. Keep looking. We need as much as we can carry. They worked silently, gathering whatever they could find. Just as they were about to leave, a loud crash echoed through the building. Jake spun around, raising his rifle. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, and heavy. Not human. Get behind me, Jake hissed, backing toward the door. A shadow appeared in the hallway, growing larger as it approached. Then, an alien stepped into view. Its body was tall and angular, its exoskeleton gleaming under the dim light. Multiple eyes scanned the room, unblinking and cold. Jake fired instinctively, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off its armor. The creature screeched, raising its weapon. Run, Jake shouted. They bolted for the exit, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow hallways. Behind them, the alien gave chase, its movements swift and precise. Jake and Sarah burst out into the open, dodging piles of debris as they sprinted toward cover. Jake fired again, aiming for the creature's exposed joints. This time, the bullet struck home, causing it to stumble momentarily. Keep going, Jake yelled, reloading his rifle. They reached a cluster of abandoned cars and ducked behind one, catching their breath. The alien emerged from the building, scanning the area with its sharp gaze. Jake waited until it was close enough, then fired another shot. The creature collapsed, its body twitching before going still. Sarah stared at it, her chest heaving. That was too close. Jake nodded, his hands trembling slightly. Yeah, let's get out of here. In Washington, D.C., Laura Bennett watched as the first wave of modified drones launched into the sky. Each drone carried an EMP device designed to disrupt the aliens' communication network. The plan was risky. If the devices failed, the drones would be wasted, but it was the only way to test their effectiveness in real combat conditions. Colonel Grace Monroe stood beside her, binoculars raised as she tracked the drone's progress. They're heading toward Chicago, she said, her voice tense. Let's hope this works. Laura bit her lip, her eyes glued to the monitors displaying live footage from the drone's cameras. On screen, the alien ships loomed large, their surfaces shimmering with strange energy patterns. The drones closed in, targeting specific frequencies based on Emily Parker's analysis. Suddenly, static filled the screens. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, chaos erupted. The alien ships faltered, their movements becoming erratic. Ground forces below began colliding with one another, their synchronization breaking down. Cheers erupted in the control room as the team realized the EMPs were working. It's working, Laura exclaimed, tears of relief welling in her eyes. The disruption is affecting their hive mind. Monroe allowed herself a rare smile. Good work, Dr. Bennett. Now let's see how long we can keep it up. Meanwhile, in New York City, Emily Parker monitored the effects of the EMP strike from her apartment. Her computer displayed data streaming in from satellites and ground sensors, showing widespread disarray among the invaders. Alien patrols wandered aimlessly, their coordination shattered. Resistance groups seized the opportunity, launching coordinated attacks against weakened positions. Emily leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. She hadn't slept in days, but the success of the EMP strike gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She forwarded her updated findings to General Hayes, who immediately relayed the information to military commanders. This changes everything, Hayes said during an emergency briefing. Their forces are vulnerable. We need to hit them hard, while their systems are down. Colonel Monroe nodded. Special ops teams are en route to the suspected locations of the central nexus. If we can destroy it, we might be able to cripple their entire operation. Hayes turned to the assembled officers. Prepare your units. This is our chance to turn the tide. Back in Los Angeles, Jake and Sarah returned to the cargo ship, their arms laden with supplies. The group greeted them with cheers, relieved to see they had made it back safely. Sarah immediately set to work treating the wounded, while Jake briefed Reynolds on their encounter with the alien. "They're tough," Jake admitted, handing over the ammunition he had salvaged. "But they're not invincible. If we can hit their weak spots, we stand a chance." Reynolds studied the alien's corpse, which Jake had dragged back for examination. "This could help us figure out better ways to fight them." As the day wore on, the group fortified the ship, setting up barricades and booby traps around the perimeter. They knew the aliens would return eventually, but for now, they had a brief reprieve. Hope flickered among the survivors, fragile but tangible dot in the distance. The hum of alien ships grew louder, a constant reminder of the threat looming above. Yet amidst the devastation, small acts of courage continued to shine. Ordinary people, banded together, refusing to surrender. Soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing the odds were slim. Scientists pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, determined to give humanity a fighting chance. In the darkness, Laura stared at the monitors displaying the effects of the EMP strike, her heart pounding with anticipation. The battle was far from over, but, for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. Somewhere, deep within the hearts of those still resisting, a spark burned brightly, a promise that humanity would keep fighting, no matter the cost. Document Part 5. The cargo ship swayed gently in the water, its deck illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Inside, the survivors worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable return of the aliens. Jake Thompson stood near the railing, staring out at the dark horizon. The hum of alien ships echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder that their reprieve was temporary. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Behind him, Sarah Miller tended to a young boy named Ethan, who had been injured during their earlier raid. His leg was wrapped in fresh bandages, but the wound still needed proper medical care. Sarah's hands moved quickly as she checked his vitals, her expression calm despite the exhaustion etched on her face. She glanced up at Jake, noticing the tension in his posture. "You should get some rest," she said softly. "You've been up for days." Jake shook his head, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I can't. Not yet. We don't know when they'll come back." Sarah sighed but didn't argue. She knew there was no convincing him to step away, not when so much depended on their survival. Instead, she focused on Ethan, speaking soothing words to keep him calm. The boy's mother sat nearby, clutching his hand tightly, her eyes red from crying. Mark Reynolds approached Jake, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "The defenses are set," he said, his voice low. "But it's not going to hold them off forever." "I know," Jake replied, turning to face him. "We just need to buy time. If we can hold out long enough for reinforcements or for someone else to figure out how to stop them, we might have a chance." Reynolds nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. "Let's hope you're right." In Washington, D.C., Laura Bennett stared at the monitors displaying live footage from satellites and drones. The effects of the EMP strike were wearing off, and the aliens' coordination was slowly returning. Their movements were still sluggish compared to before, but it wouldn't last long. Laura clenched her fists tightly, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "We need to hit them again," she muttered, typing furiously on her laptop. "But we're running out of drones." Colonel Grace Monroe stepped into the room, her expression grim. "How many do we have left?" "Not enough," Laura admitted, shaking her head. "And even if we had more, they won't be ready in time. The aliens are adapting faster than we anticipated." Monroe crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the monitors. "Then we'll have to find another way." "What about targeting their central nexus directly? If Emily's intel is accurate, destroying it could cripple their entire operation." Laura hesitated, weighing the risks. "It's possible, but getting close enough will be nearly impossible. Their defenses are too strong." Monroe nodded, thoughtfully. "Then we'll need to create a diversion. Draw their forces away from the nexus while our teams move in." Laura turned back to her computer, pulling up maps and if we coordinate the attack carefully, it might work. But we'll need precise timing and a lot of luck. Meanwhile, Emily Parker hunched over her keyboard, analyzing new data streaming in from intercepted alien transmissions. Her screen was cluttered with lines of code and fragmented translations, but one phrase kept appearing: Harvester Protocol. It seemed to refer to the aliens' ultimate goal: extracting Earth's resources to sustain their dying empire. This changes everything, Emily whispered to herself, highlighting the phrase. They're not just here to conquer, they're here to strip the planet bare. She forwarded her findings to General Hayes, who immediately convened another emergency meeting. In the Situation Room, military leaders studied Emily's data, their faces etched with urgency. Hayes pointed to a map projected on the wall, marking the suspected locations of the central nexus. If this is accurate, Hayes said, his voice steady but intense, we need to strike fast. Hit them where it hurts. Colonel Monroe stepped forward. Sir, I recommend deploying special ops teams to each of these sites. If Dr. Bennett's EMP devices are ready, we can use them to disable any defenses guarding the nexus. Hayes nodded. Make it happen, and contact all surviving resistance groups. Tell them to focus their efforts on drawing the aliens away from these locations. We'll need every advantage we can get. Back in Los Angeles, the night was eerily quiet. The hum of alien ships had faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. Jake patrolled the perimeter of the cargo ship, his senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. He knew the aliens would return, they always did. As he rounded a corner, he spotted movement in the distance. Squinting, he realized it was a group of people, approaching cautiously. Lowering his rifle slightly, he signaled for Sarah and Reynolds to join him. Together, they watched as the strangers drew closer, their hands raised to show they meant no harm. We're not with them, one of the newcomers called out, his voice trembling. We're survivors. Jake stepped forward, keeping his rifle trained on the group. Who are you? My name's Alex, the man replied. This is my sister, Mia, and a few others from our neighborhood. We've been hiding since the invasion began. Jake exchanged a glance with Reynolds, who nodded slightly. All right, come aboard. But understand this, Sif. You try anything, you'll regret it. Alex nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. The group climbed onto the ship, their faces pale and drawn. Many carried injuries, and all looked exhausted. Sarah immediately began tending to their wounds, her hands moving swiftly as she assessed their condition. They've been through hell, Sarah said quietly to Jake, wrapping a bandage around Mia's arm. But they're fighters. They can help us. Jake nodded, though his expression remained guarded. We'll see. In New York City, Emily continued analyzing the intercepted transmissions, searching for any clues that could give humanity an edge. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, decrypting fragments of alien language and piecing together patterns. Suddenly, a new phrase caught her attention. Harvest phase initiated. She froze, her heart pounding as she realized what it meant. They're starting now, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They're not waiting. She forwarded her findings to General Hayes, who issued an immediate warning to all resistance groups. Across the globe, civilians and soldiers braced themselves for the worst. Reports poured in of alien forces descending on resource-rich, areas forests, mines, and water sources. Entire ecosystems were being stripped bare, leaving devastation in their wake. On the cargo ship, Jake gathered the survivors for a meeting. The group listened intently as he outlined their plan to fortify the ship and prepare for the next attack. Tensions ran high, but a sense of purpose began to form among them. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. We can't give up, Jake said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence. If we stand together, we might have a chance. Alex stepped forward, his expression resolute. We'll fight with you. Whatever it takes. Jake nodded, gratitude flickering in his chest. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a moment of optimism. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't alone. In Washington, D.C., Laura watched as the final preparations for the assault on the Central Nexus were completed. Special ops teams were en route to their targets, armed with EMP devices and explosives. Resistance groups across the globe launched coordinated attacks, drawing alien forces away from the suspected locations of the Nexus. "This is it," Colonel Monroe said, her voice tense. "Everything rides on this." Laura nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she refused to give up. Not yet. Outside, the hum of alien ships filled the air, a constant reminder of the threat looming above. Yet, amidst the chaos, small acts of courage continued to shine. Ordinary people banded together, refusing to surrender. Soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing the odds were slim. Scientists pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, determined to give humanity a fighting chance. In the darkness, Laura stared at the glowing screens, her heart pounding with anticipation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. Somewhere, deep, within the hearts of those still resisting, a spark burned brightly, a promise that humanity would keep fighting, no matter the cost. Document. Part 6. The night was cold and silent, the kind of stillness that made every sound echo unnaturally. On the cargo ship, Jake Thompson paced back and forth, his boots clanging softly against the metal deck. The group of survivors had settled into an uneasy rest, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. His rifle hung loosely from his shoulder, but his hand never strayed far from it. Sarah Miller sat nearby, her medical kit open beside her, as she sorted through the dwindling supplies. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind was elsewhere. She glanced up at Jake, noticing the tension in his movements. "You should try to sleep," she said softly. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Jake stopped, pacing, and looked at her, his expression hard but tired. "I can't. Not until I know we're safe." Sarah sighed but didn't argue. She knew Jake well enough by now to understand that he wouldn't stop until the threat was gone or until there was nothing left to fight for. Instead, she focused on organizing the supplies, trying to keep her own fears at bay. Suddenly, a loud screech cut through the silence. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. The sound was unmistakably it was the aliens, and they were close. Jake raised his rifle and signaled for the others to take cover. The survivors scrambled to their positions, weapons in hand and hearts pounding. "They've found us," Mark Reynolds whispered, crouching behind a stack of crates. "What's the plan?" Jake scanned the area quickly, his mind racing. "We hold them off as long as we can. If things go south, get everyone to the lifeboats. We'll retreat to the water." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." In Washington, D.C., Laura Bennett stared at the monitors displaying live footage from Special Ops teams closing in on the suspected locations of the Central Nexus. Each team carried EMP devices and explosives. Their mission? Clear. Destroy the Nexus and cripple the aliens' hive mind. Laura clenched her fists tightly, her eyes glued to the screens. Colonel Grace Monroe stood beside her, her arms crossed and her expression tense. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice low. "Minutes," Laura replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "If everything goes according to plan, they'll reach the Nexus soon." On screen, one of the teams approached a massive alien structure, a towering spire, pulsating with energy. It was unlike anything humanity had seen before, its surface shimmering with strange patterns. The team moved cautiously, avoiding patrols of insectoid creatures guarding the perimeter. "This is it," the team leader whispered into his radio. "Stand by for detonation." Laura held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Everything depended on this moment. If the Nexus fell, the aliens' coordination would collapse, giving humanity a fighting chance. But if the team failed, meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the first wave of alien forces descended upon the cargo ship. Their glowing weapons illuminated the darkness as they advanced, their movements synchronized and mechanical. Jake fired a shot, aiming for the exposed joints of the nearest creature. The bullet struck home, causing it to stagger momentarily before collapsing. "Keep firing," Jake shouted, reloading his rifle. "Don't let them get close." The survivors responded, unleashing a barrage of bullets and makeshift explosives. For a moment, it seemed like they might hold their ground. But then reinforcements arrive, more aliens, pouring in from all directions. The defenders were outnumbered and outgunned. "We can't hold them off forever," Reynolds yelled, ducking behind cover as energy blasts scorched the air around him. "We need to fall back." Jake hesitated, his mind racing. He knew Reynolds was right, but retreating meant abandoning their only safe haven. Still, staying would mean certain death. "All right," he said finally. "Fall back to the lifeboats. Move." In New York City, Emily Parker monitored the battle unfolding across the globe. Her computer displayed real-time data from satellites and resistance groups, showing pockets of fierce fighting and desperate retreats. Reports poured in of alien forces targeting resource-rich areas, stripping the planet bare. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard as she analyzed new transmissions, searching for any weaknesses in the invaders' strategy. Suddenly, a message appeared on her screen, an intercepted transmission from the aliens themselves. It was fragmented, but one phrase stood out: "Nexus under attack." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it meant. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know we're going after the Nexus." She forwarded the information to General Hayes, who immediately relayed it to Colonel Monroe. In the Situation Room, military leaders studied the data, their faces grim. Hayes turned to Monroe. "Tell the teams to move faster. If the aliens reinforce the Nexus, we lose our chance." Monroe nodded and issued the order. Across the globe, special ops teams pushed forward, their movements urgent and precise. Back on the cargo ship, the survivors scrambled toward the lifeboats. Sarah helped Ethan and his mother climb aboard, her hands steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Jake covered their retreat, firing bursts of ammunition at the advancing aliens. His rifle clicked empty, and he cursed under his breath, switching to his sidearm. "We're almost there," Reynolds shouted, gesturing for Jake to follow. Jake fired one last shot before turning and sprinting toward the lifeboats. Behind him, the aliens closed in, their screeches growing louder. He leaped onto the boat just as Reynolds released the ropes, sending it drifting away from the ship. The survivors watched in silence as the aliens swarmed the cargo ship, their glowing weapons tearing through the structure. Flames erupted, lighting up the night sky. Jake clenched his jaw, guilt gnawing at him. They had lost their base, but they were still alive for now. At the suspected location of the central nexus, the special ops team planted explosives around the alien structure. The device hummed softly, its circuits pulsing with energy. The team leader stepped back, his finger hovering over the detonator. "Fire in the hole," he said into his radio, pressing the button. A massive explosion rocked the area, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The nexus collapsed, its energy patterns flickering and fading. On screen, Laura watched as the effects spread across the alien network. Ground forces faltered, their synchronization breaking down. Ships in the sky wavered, their movements erratic. "It worked," Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. It actually worked. Colonel Monroe allowed herself a rare smile. "Good work, Dr. Bennett. Now let's see how long we can keep it up." In Los Angeles, the lifeboat drifted silently through the water, its passengers weary but alive. Jake stared out at the burning wreckage of the cargo ship, his mind heavy with thoughts of what lay ahead. They had survived another day, but the war was far from over. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "We'll get through this," she said softly. "Together." Jake nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. "Yeah, together." Across the world, resistance groups launched coordinated attacks against the disorganized alien forces. Civilians and soldiers fought side by side, refusing to surrender. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion to give humanity a fighting chance. Outside, the hum of alien ships filled the air, a constant reminder of the threat looming above. Yet amidst the chaos, small acts of courage continued to shine. Ordinary people banded together, determined to protect what remained of their world. Soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing the odds were slim. Scientists pushed forward, driven by the hope that humanity's ingenuity could prevail. In the darkness, Laura stared at the monitors, her heart pounding with anticipation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. Somewhere, deep within the hearts of those still resisting, a spark burned brightly, a promise that humanity would keep fighting, no matter the cost.